G'day, welcome to iCULTIVATE. My name's Steve, and today we're going to be looking at some of the finer details of looking after and maintaining your asparagus plants. As a perennial vegetable, asparagus is a really interesting plant, and understanding the stages that it goes through across a 12-month period is really important to knowing how to care and maintain this plant. The first thing to note about asparagus is that across a 12-month period, it essentially goes through two stages. Firstly, a growth stage, and secondly, a dormancy stage. Now this asparagus here is coming towards the end of its growth stage, and I can tell this by, down the bottom here, we can start to see some of the asparagus fronds are starting to actually die back. But the reason why it goes through a growth phase at all is because most of the activity with an asparagus plant actually occurs right down in the bottom, right in the crown, which, when planted, was planted approximately 30 centimetres under the ground. And it's that crown that we have to look after to ensure that we get a wonderful harvest of asparagus each year. So often those gardeners who like their garden to look nice and neat and tidy will often feel as if they need to give this asparagus a bit of a trim back, a bit of a trim to make it look more tidy. But you need to refrain from trimming it back. The reason for that is because this asparagus is currently photosynthesizing. It's currently producing food, producing sugars, and those sugars are being pushed down into the crown, and the crown is storing those and is growing. So you have to allow this asparagus to grow and to put that energy down into the crown, because it's that crown that ultimately, when the time is right, is going to produce those wonderful asparagus spears that you will be harvesting for your dinner table. So when do you know it is time to trim this asparagus back? Well, let's have a look at a couple of things first. Firstly, you can see as this asparagus has grown, you can see that there have been some berries here that have formed. In addition to that, on some of these other asparagus fronds, you can see here that we've got some very small fine flowers. Now these flowers actually are producing either stamens or the stigmas, depending upon whether they're male or female. Ultimately, the flowers are going to form these berries, and in time these berries are going to go red. And I should take this moment to mention that these berries are in fact poisonous, so please avoid them at all costs. So sometime after the flowers and the berries are formed, what you're going to find is that your asparagus plant is going to appear to start to die back. You'll start to see dead fronds appearing, and ultimately the entire thing will die back. Once it has died back, then you can trim it back, not before. Remember, don't be tempted to trim back before it has totally died back. So when exactly should you trim it back? Well, the best answer to that is getting towards winter, depending upon which hemisphere of the world it is that you live in. So just before winter, you will find that our asparagus plant is going to die back, and once totally died back, then you trim. And you trim it back right to ground level. Once trimmed back, you've got to feed the crown. The crown is that part of the asparagus plant that is going to produce all that wonderful growth that you're going to harvest sometime in the spring. So once trimmed back, make sure you put a really good layer of organic material, various manures, compost, and also don't forget a really good layer of mulch, because particularly if you live in an area that is prone to frosts, you want to make sure that you protect the crown from frost damage. So all going well, you can be expecting to be harvesting some wonderful asparagus spears sometime early spring. But there are some things about harvesting you've got to be aware of. Firstly, remember, if your asparagus crowns are very young, if they are, say, for example, a year old, you really should not be harvesting. You really need to allow the asparagus to grow and to put energy down into the crown so it can grow and develop. You shouldn't be harvesting any asparagus until the crown is at least 2 years old. Even then, don't harvest any asparagus spears that are less than 1 centimetre in diameter. And you will find then that as you get into your third and fourth year, that you'll be able to harvest asparagus, probably about 80% of all the spears that actually emerge, for about 10 weeks. So to summarise, a few things to keep in mind. Firstly, don't forget that it's the crown of the asparagus that we're really trying to look after, and that means that we don't trim these fronds back until they have actually died back. I know how tempting that might be, particularly if you like it to look all nice, neat and tidy, but don't trim them back until they have actually died back. When you trim them back to ground level. Once you've trimmed them back, we need to feed the crown of the asparagus. Make sure that you add a good layer of mixed manures, compost, and then finish it off with a layer of mulch, particularly if you happen to live in an area which is susceptible to frost and is quite cold. The last thing that we really need to be mindful of, I guess, is that don't harvest young asparagus crowns. Make sure that your asparagus crowns are more than a year old, and if they are more than a year old, let's say 2 years, even then don't harvest spears that are less than 1 centimetre in diameter. Once you have got your asparagus plants being 3 and 4 years old, then you can harvest probably 80% of your spears, but only harvest for 10 weeks. Once that 10 weeks is up, you need to make sure you allow it to grow, to then start the cycle again, to start feeding the crown for the following year's harvest. Now, I hope you've enjoyed this video. Can I please ask you to go down to the thumbs up and give us a thumbs up, subscribe to this channel, and go to our website, iCULTIVATE.net, and become a member of the community. Thanks for watching.